Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unreal Fest Bali. How's it going so far? Are you enjoying some rain? Yeah, good time. My name is Adrienne Pugh. I'm a technical UI design director at Epic. I technically work on Fortnite, but I love to present and showcase UI and get everyone excited about UI. Now, there's one little tip about this presentation. It's going to be interactive, which means I need all of you to participate when I ask you to participate. So get ready, get your hands ready, get your opinions and thoughts ready, because that's actually what I really want to go into. But this talk, we're going to do 5-minute operations to improve your UI. The task that I was asked to do, which is how do you elevate UI with actually getting all into redoing your entire project, right? So we're going to want to get quality improvements to minimal to moderate efforts. So some of this talk is going to be a little bit basic, but some of this talk is going to be very kind of technical and really cool techniques. But all of these things should be quite quick and easy to do to your project. So you don't need to overhaul everything. You don't have to start from scratch. This is kind of stuff that you could take away and use right now in your presentation. Or my presentation, I guess, for you. So next up, let's talk about which operations are we going to execute. I'm going to talk about tips. I'm going to talk about some tricks, some engine settings, and some setups, how you can think about setting up your project files. And so the very first one we're going to go over is removing all default padding and styling from your UI. And so a lot of us know, like, it's really exciting as a game developer to watch and see another game, and we're like, how did they do that? What engine did they use? Did they use this plugin? Did they execute this? All of this is this amazing way that we are able to hide and remove the watermark from that software. Like, we all kind of know, like, when I see something, I'm like, oh, that was made in After Effects. I can kind of tell based on the software watermark. So my tip for everyone here is to think about removing the UI from your experience. So we're going to set up a little fun content going on here. I'm going to have some defaults open. I'm also going to run this so you folks can see that. And we're going to run the default screen open. And this is where I want some participation activity here. I'm going to preview these two options. You have these two options for your UI. You have option 1, and this is some ugly UI, like, let's all admit it here, right? Which option do you think looks better? So I want to know, who likes option 1? And you can also not vote and say both are ugly, but that's totally fine. Who prefers option 1? Raise your hand, option 1. Got a couple of folks, all right. What about option 2? Who's liking option 2? Yes. Who can tell me why? Why? Yeah, there's a bit less drop shadows, there's all this other stuff. So the actual difference between this is I've removed default Unreal settings. So let's actually go into what particularly in Unreal is shown here. And let's pop this little guy up so you folks can see it a little bit better. The only differences between these two are me removing Unreal's default settings. So let's go into each one. We have the border widget. This widget is wrapping our content with the red container. And then if I go into my settings and I say show modified only, so the difference between option 1 and option 2 is I just remove the content padding. And that is removing this little 2x4 pixel padding that's in every single UMG widget. As soon as I see someone set up a project and they haven't removed this, I'm like, oh, you're using UMG. So that's one thing. We're going to go into our button widget now, and inside of our button text, we have option 1 has the default padding. Option 2, I've just removed that padding. So it's actually super flush against the edges, versus if you go with this original text box in option 1, you can see it's got the 2x4 padding at the top of it. I think everyone reacted to the scroll bar, right? The scroll bar has this default fade inside of UMG. And guess what? When I removed it from the other one, we got a lot cleaner scroll bar going on here. And that is all here where it says top brush, bottom brush, all of this sort of stuff. So that kind of removes that really awkward black scroll bar that you kind of see there. That's doing that. We even have it in something as simple as a text or a checkbox over here. In this checkbox, if I go from option 1 to option 2, there's a little sub padding thing that's adding 2 pixels in this one every time, only to the left. So Unreal has a lot of these hidden things inside of UMG that I highly recommend that you go and you remove those defaults, and you'll get something that you can start as a fresh slate when you begin redoing your UI. And I just made a pun about Slate, and good on me. But let's go into our next topic. So, we all reacted pretty strongly to that scroll bar. Guess AAA games have been putting and leaving the scroll bar inside of all of their projects. Now, Hogwarts Legacy, fantastic game, highly recommend playing it. But I was watching my friend play this, and as soon as I saw that bottom fade, I was like, oh, that's UMG. So, how do we handle scrolling? Scrolling is actually quite a complicated topic when it comes to UI, and getting a graceful scrolling fade is also quite difficult. So I want to discuss through some tricks how do you color match a scroll bar, how can you use screen space UVs to kind of fade a scroll bar, using a retainer box to modify a scroll bar, and then we're going to get really, really fancy with using some post-processing blurs and some crazy effects to also absolutely destroy our performance. So we are going to go into that next. Scrolling. I don't know why I'm super passionate about it, but this is why you're here, for UI. So we'll go into our first demo here. I think this one is the kind of easiest to understand. This scroll bar, even we have the same hideous UI, right? This isn't any better looking, but it looks so much better because it's fading much cleaner. And so how have I set this up? In the general scroll bar widget, I like to go down and I like to make my own material here. So I have a material for the top one, a material for the bottom, and then I actually use draw as box to do some 9 slicing, and that produces like a really nice fall off where I don't have to go in the material and edit the fall off. I can actually use the 9 slice box shading to do all that for me. But let's just go into this material. This is going to be a super simple material. I basically have a linear gradient, and do I invert or not invert, right? Very simple, but you can already get better quality UI just by adding a fade. So that's a solid color. But I hear you all saying, what if my UI is not on a solid color? What, in fact, if my UI is on something moving? How does that solid color look? Bad. This looks really bad. So how do you handle something where the UI is dynamically changing in the back and you want to also have a nice fade scroll? So in this particular instance, my background material, and it's the same as this lovely editor utility widget down here, what I am doing is I'm taking from the UI material lab and I'm showcasing and making a bunch of waves and doing some fancy things here. And all I need to do is, instead of using local coordinate space, I'm going to switch this to screen space, and then I can have my mask material also reference screen space pixels, so therefore I always know exactly where to fade my scroll bar. So we're going to open up the second project here. We're going to preview this one, and you can see that this looks incredibly great and much better than it did before, because this is actually referencing the background material, and it's using screen space UVs to then map exactly where the moving like pink wave is coming through, that sort of stuff. So let's just take a quick look at this material. The background material has changed only slightly. I've gone from, instead of local coordinate space, to screen coordinate space. So you can see that kind of here as I move across, right? The UVs are changing. So that I've updated that over here. I've updated, ooh, this mouse is so sensitive. I've updated that over there, and this one last area. So all I need to do is actually inside of my scroll bar material is it's exactly the same logic we had before, but I just copied and pasted that little linear gradients into the opacity, and voila, exactly the same setup. But now I'm just having the mask exactly where the screen space pixels are. So you're getting a lovely fall off that is a dynamic moving background material and also fading, and it looks much more polished. But that's not all. What if it's on the 3D scene background? What about then? Well, that's where you use retainer boxes. So this is I was told it was a crafting bench. I made it as a crafting bench. My colleague said it was the murder bench. And I think it's because of the red there. But so here's using a retainer box to make a nice little scroll bar fade. And so I'll kind of go over that. But what I don't like about the retainer box is it's also fading that little scroll bar itself. So let's go into the retainer box. We'll pop that one open. And you can also look at the QR code over here. It's also got a lot of information about a retainer box. So the retainer box widget is a very unique widget that has gone through the life cycle of any kind of widget that was made for one purpose and absolutely abused and hacked for a very different purpose. So the retainer box originally is a performance panel to phase render the content. So it takes everything inside of the retainer box, it flattens it to a single texture, and then it should phase render that texture maybe like, every 60 frames or something. That's how it was intended to be used. And then artists were like, wait, you've just given me a post-processing material and I can do anything on it. So what used to be a performance material has turned into the opposite, turned into a not performance widget. But it's also fantastic for a scroll bar phase. So I always say in moderation, right? We like chocolate in moderation. We like our bad performance in moderation. It's the same thing. So over here, we've got our retainer box. And I can pass in that flattened material and do anything into it. So if we pop open the material here, this is going to be the UI. So it flattens everything inside the retainer box to that texture, and that's called texture param. I'm making a very simple little mask here. You can see it fading kind of on the top and the bottom. And that's what's going to give us that lovely faded scroll here. So that's what's going to get you that. However, if I wanted to fix it so that the scroll bar was not being faded, because you can see here, right, the scroll bar is also being faded because it's inside of that texture. What if I want to do is fix that? So I've made on the bottom here just a wee little sliver, like a little mask sliver, and I'm going to say stop fading it there. So I'm going to combine it with a lovely max, and then so you can see in our material just at the very edge, we're not going to have the feathering fade. And save and we should go. And it's going to, now our scroll bar is not going to be faded, but the content inside is going to be faded. So that's another little like visual polish tweak. If I see a AAA game have the fade also include the scroll bar, I'm like, you can do better. And you all here can do better, I promise. And then the last technique I'm going to show off is a little more dicey on the performance end, but way cooler. So you can't not show it. Just use with caution. Make sure you reach out to your performance team if you are going to implement this. But this is using the new Slate post buffer update to handle the UI. So I'm doing something crazy here. I'm actually blurring the game scene, adding a mask, and then making a really on vibes kind of a scrolling visual. And I'll kind of break down where that is in the material. But now with the Slate post buffer, we have a way to access the game buffer and then sandwich it in between different layers of UI and do really fun material effects to it. But again, use with caution. It is a little performant, but if you want to read up on the documentation for the post-processing buffer, this is the QR code, and I'll have it also later. But let's go into that widget. So what's cool about the post buffer is you have a post buffer update. Where do you want the post buffer to start? And you have a post buffer material. What do you want to sample and use that post buffer with? Right now they're in the same layer. So here's my post buffer material. Here's my post buffer update. So inside of this material, we're doing some fancy things here, but there's this lovely like get Slate post buffer. So you can actually access that game buffer in any material inside of UI, which gets really exciting when you're doing crazy things like blur and other stuff. I'm accessing that buffer, and then here is kind of where I'm masking it out. So I'm this like really dark grayish area. That's actually where the mask is going for this post buffer update. And then I'm doing like a fancy thing of like combining and making a dot grid over here to make it look like a different kind of blur. Just modify the blur a little bit. So this is generally what it's laid out to be. And this is in the grid panel, so I'm saying render on top of all the UI. So my layer is 20, so I'm saying render this blur on top of every little bit of UI. But if I were to have it render beneath it, it's then going to show up behind all the UI. So it's interesting that you can actually take the game buffer and sandwich it in between different layers of your UI and do different things to it. So super exciting tool. Now we're also going to do something crazy like let's just put the material inside of the scroll box. Let's wrap this with this looks pretty good. Let's just see what that's going to look like. And we're going to get a blur and a buffer in a very different place than before. So you can see that this is where you can maybe make some interesting panels, like blur panels. And you can create like a rounded corner on this if you want to have a dynamic and more interesting content. So you can also choose where and how much of the buffer gets sampled and updated and drawn. So I really like the post-processing buffer. We are using it all over Fortnite, but it is a performance it's a performance cost. So to make sure you factor that into your UI budget. And that is going to go over the scroll bar. So next up we've got, let me make sure I get my PowerPoint up. I have another quiz for you folks. Option A, option B. Call out the difference. Spot the difference. Yeah, I'm hearing outline. Does anyone know why this happens? It's exactly the same asset. All right, so no one's encountered this before. This is what happens when you import a PNG from your 2D editing software that doesn't pre-multiply the alpha. You will get this white halo effect over your PNG assets. So there's actually a really easy way to fix this. Rather than re-export all your icons you've ever made from PNGs, you can actually go into your editor texture import settings and change it to be set to always fill, and then it will actually fix the white halo effect. So I'm going to pop open my example. You folks can kind of see it in action here. So this was exactly the same asset imported in, and I'll show you the two different ways that it shows up. So if I remove the alpha channel here, you can kind of see why we're getting this halo effect, right? Because the alpha isn't actually pre-multiplied in, so it's going to come up as white, so all those little tiny pixel feathers are going to show up. However, when I go into my, and let's just make sure, I'm on the wrong material, but it's all good. If we go into our edit, project settings, and you'll search PNG, if you set the when infill RGB transparent white PNG to always, you will be set to then have it infill. Now, what does an infill PNG look like? This is like a horror. You're like, what am I looking at? Like something smeared the icon across the entire screen. This will get rid of those pixels, but it's a little confusing to work in. So I wanted to kind of pop this open and show it. So how do you use these PNGs in materials? It's a little bit more different than kind of the standard pipeline and process. So we're going to go back and pop in here. We've got two materials. Usually when I use these, you can just plug in your alpha and look, everything is dandy and nothing looks very weird. And then it will work fine for like panner nodes, etc. You know, you can plug in 0.1, pan it, and you know, if you take over the opacity weight, you're getting the nice smear. But that should work fine. However, when you want to do more complex materials with PNGs, like say this is a nameplate where you would have your text show for the icon. In this particular case, if I just combine the alphas, I'm still getting the smear. I'm still getting that kind of smear effect. So I'm missing a thing here, which is interesting. But here, I just like to multiply my RGB to my alpha, and that will fix kind of all of this. So whenever I'm working with a PNG inside of materials, I'm always doing the multiply, the alpha, to make sure that it's just easier to use and you get a predictable result out of everything that you're doing. So if you're working with PNGs to, you know, cut your file size down, all of that, I recommend always doing this to your PNGs if you are in that space. And I'm going to go back a bit because it looks like we skipped up some slides. The next topic I'm going to talk about some color style guides. So in this particular case, a lot of times production, when you get into production, you're like, okay, I have a color style guide. It's going to go great. And then everything changes. Art direction changes, everything changes. And you're like, oh, I have to go back and change all of those colors. And what do? I like to make style guides in a couple different ways. So this is a project setup. I love to use material parameter collections to set up your colors. I also really like to use material functions. If you're a small team and you're not like constantly swapping builds or doing that kind of pipeline, editor color themes are fantastic. And if you're very complex, then using data assets and abstracting out your data is also like quite a struggle and a challenge. But that's generally like tokenize your colors and turn it into a larger system. So I'm going to kind of go through some interesting ways to use material parameter collections, material functions, and then the editor color themes. And if you are interested in more advanced data abstraction, you can hit me up in the dev lounge, but I won't be demoing that particular use case. However, no. Let's pop into it. So this is a menu that I made about 2 years ago. And we're going to hack the engine a little bit by making it much smaller. Ooh, not that small. So we can kind of preview this. Ooh, let's go a bit smaller. Let's say 0.5. Yeah. So this is like my interesting kind of VHS menu here. And I made this about 2 years ago. And when I made it, I wanted to make sure that I made it so that I could go and modify all of these colors on the fly. So I apologize, the engine is going to be a little small, but just imagine that it just says colors. And this is a material collection parameter. So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to start modifying all of these things. Like let's go take this and let's say your art director wants to go more purple. I'm liking that. That's looking pretty good. Let's go with our tape color. So we want to have the tape open so that we can kind of see what we're working with. I'm looking, ooh, yeah, let's go with teal. What do we think? We like the teal? Brighter? Lighter? Dark? Have you had many a Slack message? Can you just darken it a little bit? Can you just and you're like, yeah, I can. So super simple and easy there. The light one is going to be fascinating because I have some shifted values for this. So this is kind of going to change the values of this one. We're going to maybe do something like a little subset lavender. That's looking pretty good. Let's go to the core yellow. I'm thinking, I'm not minding the blue. The bluish. No, let's go green. Let's go full green. We're taking it teal and purple, complementary opposites. And then of course I can go into my stickers. So these are all these different stickers here. And yeah, let's go pink. So I've just changed most of my style guides and everything inside the engine just by modifying a couple of things. If you set up your stuff using these, it's going to be really easy. Also, this is super accessible for any colorblind settings that you might want to set up, any of that. You're just allowing the user to shift hues or shift values, and this should be really easy to execute inside of the engine. And with that, I'm going to make sure that I have the right widget open. So this is kind of using that. Let's actually break into this. I'm going to reset my engine scale so you folks can see a kind of larger screen. And let's see how these materials are working inside of the widgets. So I'm going to go back to my editor here. We're going to just take a look at one of these widgets or one of these materials and check it out. So this is what I'm doing is I'm getting the collection parameter. And I'm just saying, hey, reference my tape colors and reference the sticker color, right? And then that's the sticker color there. Now, what's interesting about this is when I made this, like this main menu, I didn't want to make this accent color. I thought that this accent color should just be a shift off of the main color. And you can actually do that as well inside of your materials. So I'm taking what used to be yellow, and I'm converting the color space from red, green, blue to hue saturation value. And what I'm doing is I'm creating an accent color by just shifting the values a little bit down. So whatever this color is, it's going to spit out a slightly darker version and shift a desaturated version of it over here. So I also don't need to programmatically set up all my accent colors. I can just pull from the color, get an accent color, and then grab that. So this is generally how I like to set up my UI going forward. It will break in some areas, so if we pull this back up, we can get the little silver lines to absolutely demolished, like here. Now we've gone in complementary opposite colors, but most of the time it's a pretty succinct system. If you know what colors to avoid, you can kind of clamp down the math on that. And the other trick to note is that when you want to animate this for UI, you don't necessarily want to animate it using changing the collection parameter, because that's going to then change that main color everywhere. So when I animate these things inside of widgets, I'm going to want to do it through the animation sequencer here. So in hovered, I'm going to animate this one color to another color. And inside of the material, how I generally will animate anything is just by doing a lerp. So if we go in here, if I need to animate any of my, global collection parameters, I'll just lerp between them. And then there in sequencer, I can do all the curves the artist can do and go crazy. But this is generally how to prevent you from accidentally changing a color at runtime. And then everything has that new dark colors, the new value. So that's generally what I would recommend. The other way to do this, which I think is underutilized, but generally works for a lot of use cases, is by material functions. So I put inside of here a little material function that holds all of my colors. And this would then work for your VFX. This would work for anything that uses materials. And I just put all of my main colors inside of here. And it's super simple, and it keeps it all in one place. And so whenever I want to reference that color, I can just multiply it to whatever I need or lerp it, anything that happens there. But how do you access that in a widget that isn't necessarily running that material? You could then say materials for everything, but what I have been known to do is I've been known to just have something that has the material in it, reference that collection, that parameter, and then just set my text block to the color. So I don't actually need to have a material for all of my text. I just have to have something that has that initial thing in there, and it can just basically, we could put this to stickers. I think it's called sticker, and it will now reflect the actual color coming from my material function. So that's generally how I handle a lot of that. The other fun one that I think is fantastic for smaller level devs and indie gamers, or indie games that don't necessarily need to have complex things, is let's go back to the style guide here. You can just set up a theme, a color theme. I think color themes are really awesome. So in the color theme, I've got a little theme here. I've got Tape's theme, and I can just go and create a theme and reuse all these colors. And I can go and reset all my colors that I made here. So this is going to be, oh no, that's the light color. This is the yellow. And this is the stickers. And so I actually like to make themes. You can make different ones. You can add new, all of that sort of stuff. If you're working on the smaller level project, that's kind of how I would set this up, so I don't have to create anything super complicated. So I highly also recommend using the color themes if you're not merging, changing projects. It's a really easy way to keep the data in one place. So that is how I would style anything in the engine for when it comes to like a visual style guide. All right. Since I accidentally got ahead, we're going to skip past some of these things and go into another setup, materials instead of textures for buttons. They're generally easier to animate, manage, mask, and clip and do a bunch of things. If you have worked in UI and in UMG, in general, it wants to point you to use materials. But then we have a very confusing widget called the button widget that says, like, do you want a textured for hovered and a textured for pressed and a textured for this? And the answer is no. No, you do not. You just want an invisible hit area. And that is kind of the best way to think about buttons in Unreal. So you have an invisible hit area, and then you actually have the visibility thing there. That's generally easier to function in the engine that way. So if we pop open my example here, I'm going to have another vote test. We're going to expand this a little bit because we scaled it down. So, who likes? Oh, I'm gotta skip ahead here. Yep. All right. So this is option A button. I'm clicking to do it. So this is a hover and this is a click. Who likes option A? The speedy demon. I see one hand. Props to you. you who's in for option B? Yes. You know what? I feel for you. Option A. Let's go into it. So in general, the only difference between these, they're exactly the same button widget, but this one has the buttons set up as buttons. So our normal button is here. Our hovered button is this one. So yeah, the differences between the two are just flopping or switching the squares. And then we have our clicked. So we've got kind of all three of these. And the button widget lets you put these in, but you can't animate it. You can't do anything. You can't basically control anything. And if I can stress one thing, UI is a state machine. You are going from one state to another state. That's all UI is. And it's all about that finesse animation in between. Every UI artist is going to want to finesse that state A into state B. And so allowing those animations is generally going to make a better and more refined product. So here I've got an overlay. I've got my background image, which is just a material. And then if I'm ever making a demo project, I just set my button to none for everything. And it's just invisible hit area. And that's generally how I prefer to work through those things. So if we pop into this material, since it's not a power of 2, it's going to look a little funky. So I'm going to just expand it out over here. And look, I just use lerps. I'm just lerping between texture hovered, or texture normal, texture hovered, texture clicked. I just lerp between them with a little parameter. And voila, in the animations, now I can pick, hey, when I hover, ooh, let's zoom in there, I can actually choose how much slow, how fast. So option 1 person, guess what? Option A, if you would like that single frame animation, all you got to do is just shorten this to a single frame and voila. Now we have exactly the same effect, but it's now more our control. And for clicked, I go from 0 to 1 back to 0 to kind of show that click there. So most of the time in UMG and in Unreal, the push is towards materials, but we still have these widgets like the button widget that put in textures. Just put the textures. If you need to use textures, just put them in the material. Generally easy to work with, and you'll get more control over that particular concept. Next up, I don't know why my slides keep flipping around, but is material functions. So material functions are essentially how all of us in any sort of AAA UMG world build anything. So who here has seen the UI Material Lab and used it? Yeah, we got some power users, love it. So I want to showcase kind of what the Material Lab is. It's this amazing project set up by my colleague Arena. She wanted to teach herself materials, so she built this internally, and I was like, why don't we ship that for everyone? So it's also like a learner project. She really learned a lot from this. So we are going to pop it open, the Material Lab. I'm going to showcase some of the amazing things you will see in this Material Lab. It'll show gradients, radials. You want to have that square ability radial, it's right there. You want to mess with time. You want to change your own easings and do some funky effects. If you are a sign distance field fan like I am, you can go into there. And guess what? Every single project that I ever do, I basically go here. I don't need all of these other things. I right click, I say migrate. I migrate all those material functions to whatever project that I'm in. And this is what I do every single new thing. So for sure, do not have to figure out this math yourself. Just get this project and migrate it. But that's not the only use of material functions here. So if you haven't done it, definitely migrate and grab those. I will say Fortnite heavily uses them, and I know many a AAA studio also uses them. So you'll be meeting the industry standards. But let's talk about where I use them for styling. So we saw that tape project before. All of those different styles of the tapes and the different variable visuals that we've got going on for this. And I have to hack my scale again to let's go 0.7. Even smaller. But all of these visuals are made just using 3 material functions. The entire look and feel of this entire menu is 3 material functions, and I'm just reusing those functions over and over again in different materials. So I'm going to showcase how I made it and kind of go over the concept behind it. We're going to pop open. So I have a desaturate. This takes it so when I'm hovering over the widget, I just desaturate the widget itself. So we're going to preview this again, but when I hover over it, you can see like each one's getting more saturated. So I just have this desaturate function that's going to basically shift. Again, I'm going to change my color space into red, green, blue, and I'm just going to animate a desaturate value. So that's one function. If we go into the other function, we've got this outline border function. And all this is doing is making that cool, nifty little outline border that's across every single one of these things. You can kind of see it here. You can see how it's making an outline across each tape. That's all the same material function. I just made it once and then I'm just reusing it everywhere. And then the last one, which I think is kind of the meaty and more interesting one, is this tape displacement. So this is creating all that like paper noise kind of 2D animation effect is all inside of this single material function. And a great use case of showing this is the UI tape. So this is made all from procedurally generated shapes, this like tape here. You can see it in action. And they're all pulling from exactly these displaced UVs. So if I use a regular coordinate system, and I just shift this all here, now I've got kind of a boring, static, meh. It looks cool for a tape, but the entire menu is just built on this one function, really styling almost everything. And so you just build it once, and you start using it in fun, creative ways, and you can get a really diverse and interesting menu without really putting a ton of effort in. So highly recommend going for material functions, reuse, recreate, and most people don't think about it in the UI space, but it's extra handy for both styling and for not redoing any work. Now we're going to have another quiz, and this one's going to be exciting. I want you to guess, 1, which you like better, 2, why you like it better. So we're going to go into a lovely preview. I'm really curious what option A person said. Okay, so we have option 1 and option 2. Now we're taking a look. This is maybe one of the more confusing UIs I've ever made. Who here likes option 1? Yeah, we've got some folks in the crowd likes option 1. Who here likes option 2? All right, major majority. Now, why do you like option 2? Who here sees the problem? Sorry, speak up. Yeah, so feels more organic. Can anyone guess why it feels more organic? Yes, green space UVs. So what's problem here, and I've also seen this in a lot of AAA games, they'll make this amazing, beautiful icon effect, and then they put multiple of these icons together, and I can literally see the pattern, and I'm like, no, you were so close to perfect. So the option 1, you can see there's a repeating pattern going on through each one of these ability icons. And in option 2, there's a similar pattern, but it's not exactly the same. So that's why we were saying it feels more organic, because you're not actually repeating the same thing. Now, the human tendency is to see patterns really quickly. And if you're a VFX artist, you spot a noise pattern a mile away if it repeats, right? And so we kind of have that similar effect going on here. So I want to showcase kind of like how easy it is in the UI. One little trick here that I did to make these ability icons is I just rotated a grid panel 45 degrees because I was like, I don't want to deal with actually positioning it perfectly. So very funny. But this is also why all my displacement is on the bottom, going that way, right? Because I'm rotating the other way. So this is generally what it looks like with a local UV coordinate space. So this is a local UV coordinate, and this is another UV coordinate. And I made something really obnoxious, so you could see a pattern in the colors, you could see a pattern in everything else. But in the displacement screen space one, it's exactly the same content, but instead I'm using screen space and rescaling it. And in this one, I'm using screen space and rescaling it. So if you kind of want that AAA polish, I highly recommend going in and making sure that you don't leave any repeatable noise and repeatable patterns that someone can see. And every AAA game does this. I have seen very popular AAA games repeat the patterns in the UI. You can do better. We all here can do better. So that is kind of the last little quiz that we have going on. And the next one is going to be a brand new thing that has been in the engine forever, but no one knew about. Mouse cursor inside of the material. So I think if a lot of people have worked in UI, everyone wants to make a parallax effect. Everyone wants to do something on the mouse. And every single person's like, well, I have to put that on tick. No. So little did we all know, inside of the view buffer, there's the mouse cursor position at all times. So you can grab this and put it in your material, your world materials, your UMG materials. It doesn't matter what material you want. So we're going to go over that and how to do it. I'm going to close up you. We're going to go into our last one. And so the very first one should be a simple widget. I've got a widget here, and you can see it's grabbing the mouse position no matter where it is in space. There's no logic. Nothing's in here. Nothing's on tick. Because inside of Unreal, there's the MFUI cursor position function. Now, if this doesn't exist in your version of Unreal, guess what it does? Because it's in the custom node, and it just says get view buffer return cursor position. So this exists in every version of Unreal right now. Generally, I will caveat maybe 4. I'll have to look at 4. But this is generally already in the engine. So you can already use this. You can already grab this and do some fun things with it. So what are some of the fun things? The very first one I made was this like little spotlight hidden effect. Yeah, I heard an ooh in there. Yeah, very fun. Thinking kind of like maybe find your UI, which is really bad UX. We don't tell the UX designers that. But let's go back to the graph. Yeah, nothing, right? There's no logic in here. We're keeping it super simple. There's only 4 different images that then have the same material kind of running across them. So the way that I've set this up is you get the cursor position, you distance it from the pixel position, and let's just draw a border so that folks can see it here. That gives you white, right? Nothing. And then you divide it by some arbitrary number, 150 or something or so to get a size. And then I'm just doing a little bit of math to get it in looking like that, and the final color is 1. And so that's all you have to do to have reactive mouse things. So think of the stuff you could do. You could do parallaxing with shifting cards or all sorts of fun things. This can also go in any of your non-UI materials. This is exposed everywhere. So if you want to shift other offsets and other things inside of your materials, it's completely doable. But let's go over something that maybe is a little more interesting use case of. Now, I think I want to use another utility. Yeah. So this is reacting to button clicks now. So now I've got multiple widgets having the same UI, and I'm creating kind of like a button click. Now there's a tiny bit of logic needed to execute this, but I think it's not that crazy. I think we all can do it. I think we're all very great people here. All I'm doing is on button click, passing in the time into the material, and that's it. And I'm just doing it 4 times because I have 4 different things. That's it. This is all the logic that I need. On button click, pass in parameter. So let's take a look at what the material is doing, because all the heavy work is in there. And this material is, first we have this little tiny cursor. It's like my tiny little, you can see it following the mouse here. I have a little guy following the mouse there. That's what that's doing. Then these are all from the UI Material Lab. If you want to reuse some functions and grab them, go get them. This one is handling the button click. So I'm going to kind of showcase that. I'm taking the button click at whatever time the world time is, subtracting it from a time node, and then turning it into multiply. To test this, I usually plug in a frac node, and then this is the effect that you could see happening going on. So when I click, it's just going to grab the game time and then subtract a thing. How you can kind of debug this is debug scalar values. When I usually test this sort of stuff, this is the really painful way of testing it. You could say I'm at 5, 2, 5, 3. Let's put this at 5, 2, 6, 5, maybe. And then eventually it's going to simulate like a click. Yep, right there, simulated click. Now, that's really annoying, right? Nobody wants to do that, so I just do a frac and have fun. But that's kind of what it's doing. It's grabbing the current game time, and that gets passed in by the blueprint when it's clicked, and it will then show you that value here. And then I just combine those and some fancy effects, and that is basically it. So if you haven't already and thought about making some fun mouse cursor parallax effects, go for it. It should be pretty good and cheap and already in your view buffer anyway for your stuff. So with that, we're going to go into the project details and useful links part, and we'll kind of end it there. My project setup that I've been using for this was Common UI plugin, UMG view models, which I'll go way more elaborate than the other talks. The UMG widget previewer, very experimental. It crashes quite a bit. But if you've wondered how I've gone from design view to graph view to preview view, that is using UMG Previewer with this enable preview mode set to 1. So if you're curious of how I've been swapping back and forth and seeing all that, that is one thing there. If you were curious to grab the Material Lab, it's right there. Content Examples also has tons of great post-processing effects in there. So if you want to see other cool UI post-processing effects in there, grab the Content Examples. Should be good. And then here's some interesting thing. If you are new to materials, you're new to UMG, you're new to UI, we've made 2 courses, the materials textures for UI and the using UVs for tech art and UI. This is geared for the very beginner learner that doesn't know anything about UVs, materials, all of that, and how do you incorporate that in UI, right? A lot of tutorials about like generic materials and VFX, but like how does that apply to a button? How does that apply to UMG? These 2 courses kind of do that for that. And then, yeah, that's kind of it for my 5-minute operations. I hope everyone found some little 5-minute thing that they can have inside of their game or try out. I will be at the Dev Lounge right after this, so if you have questions, because we are at time. But other than that, thank you so much for attending, and I can't wait